Okay, thank you very much for the introductions. Thank you very much for being here. It's a great honour to be here to present at this session. I think I can speak for both of us to say that we really enjoyed the session that we did at the annual conference last June, I think it was. And this is a little bit of an update on that. And we are going to be talking about what is actually quite a hot topic in the qualitative research space. Which is what's happening in terms of generative AI and how that is changing the way that qualitative research happens. So we want to speak to the question about whether these new technical developments constitute a step change in how we go about doing qualitative research, whether it's a really scary, dangerous thing, an abomination, which is a word that I find very difficult to say, so I will avoid saying it too many times, or whether it's something else. So we really want to raise the questions around that in this session today. We're going to talk about four key things. First of all, a little bit about what's occurring in the qualitative AI space at the moment, what the implications for that are on the field, why it matters, why this conversation is a really important one to have, and what we can do about it collectively as a community. As Tina said, it's an interactive session, so you are allowed to have your phones on, okay? But please put them on silent, but we are going to be asking you to answer a few questions along the way. Okay, so you are probably aware that there's quite a lot of hype around the topic of AI generally, and we have lots of hype around boosting AI, talking about how wonderful it is. And the sort of inevitability discourse, the idea that it's inevitably going to change lots of aspects in the world. And on the other side, we also have discourses which are much more about the doom and the gloom. So there's very much a polarizing discourse around AI generally, and that also infiltrates into the qualitative research sector. And so we're really interested just to get a sense of what your feelings are around the use of AI for qualitative research. So this is the first moment you're allowed to get your phones out, please. And we would really like you to scan the QR code and just answer a couple of questions which will give us a little bit of an insight about who you are, what your interest is in this space, and what your current feelings are to our question about whether AI in qualitative research is a step change, an abomination, or something else. Are you all okay with the QR code? Fabulous. Whilst you're doing that, we've been asking these questions for the last couple of years. So every event that we've done, whether it's a training event, a webinar, or something like this, we've been asking similar questions. And this is the answers that we've had cumulatively from people responding to the question of how you would characterize your current thoughts. So we will compare what you've said to what the cumulative responses. So this is the cumulative responses of about 175 to 200 people over the last couple of years in events that we've done. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Steve, who's going to answer the question about whether we've seen these kinds of discourses and debates previously.
So whenever you get new technology, it tends to be greeted with these similar things. Is it going to be amazing, boosting it? Or is it going to be the end of the world? So it's a bit of just open questions. What are nuisances? And the communicative man gives his reasons for so declaring.
So shout out.
Any guesses what technological innovation this was?
Radio.
Radios?
Telephone?
Telephone?
Books.
Ah, that was bicycle. Bicycles are nuisances, okay? What are mind-altering devices? This is the Daily Times. Terrible mind-altering devices.
Television.
Television. Whoa. That was Walkman earphones. There we go. Right. So yes, they're definitely altering people's minds. Until it can do dishes, what remains of little value to families? Any guesses?
The internet.
The internet. Oh, I like the internet. You did good answer to go for.
Oh.
That's home computers, still unable to do that. So obviously of little value to families to this day. What are blamed for youth insanity? Muskegon, Michigan. What was it? Insanity causing in children. Yo-yos. Yo-yos, cigarettes. Any more?
Game Boys.
No, it's those bikes again. So you think it's always this one. I mean, I think there's a tendency, it's like, this is the most incredible thing that's ever happened. It's going to change the world. It's going to be terrible. It's amazing. We always see it. But where are you guys? Is what we're interested in. So,
So this
Christina.
was, yeah, thank you. So this was the cumulative responses from the past. Don't get to be able to click on it.
Now we're going to have the fun.
Now we're going to
which screen is which.
You need to sort out the screen. If we can't do it, I can see that.
That's going to be a way. Look, see.
Excellent. There's always someone technical in the house. Okay, so there's quite more than half of you here are experienced qualitative researchers, a few novices, and some with no qualitative experiences. We are just interested to see where you're coming from, but this is the most interesting thing down here. So 41% quite excited about the potential of AI in qualitative research, some skepticism, and some unsure responses. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. You need to now get rid of the honesty.
It's always this is fun, isn't it? Especially right off the screen. Okay,
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll come back to that and think about whether anything's changed later on in the session after we finished our talk. Okay, so one of the things I said we were going to talk about is why this matters, and there's a number of reasons why this discussion about AI and qualitative research matters. First of all, as we saw in your responses, qualitative research is happening across a variety of sectors within different disciplines using different methodological approaches. So qualitative research is becoming more and more ubiquitous across those different settings. And so we need to think about that and the implications of these new technologies in those different sectors. There are some discourses around the fact that AI opens up qualitative research beyond the professions. So now that we can use things like ChatGPT, who's used ChatGPT or something similar? Most people these days, yeah? So now there's quite a lot of discourses around the idea that anyone can do qualitative research because anyone can use something like ChatGPT. And that kind of discourse really means that as professional qualitative researchers coming from these different sectors, we need to think about what this actually means for how we go about our work. And what the reputation of our work might look like. And finally, Steve and I are both teachers, so we're always thinking about, okay, what are the implications of these new technologies in how we teach the next generation of qualitative researchers? And one of the things that we're very keen on is the idea that we can't have our heads in the sand. Students are using these technologies. As teachers, we need to be very realistic about that, and so we need to think about what are the appropriate ways of teaching ethical use of AI.
So let's get down to what are we talking about here. So how many of you here use something like NVivo, AppsTI, MaxQDA? Okay. Anybody here use something like AntConc? No, that's always a good one to throw out, like eternal what? Any sort of text mining, QDA miner, WordStat? Brilliant, right. Okay, so computational linguistics, natural language processing. There is a whole set of software. It's deliberately illustrated with a kind of, this is often quite command line. So things like AntConc was about doing concatenation of words. It's about, there is some coding in there, but the coding is linguistic. So it's often about parts of speech. Is it a noun? Is it a pronoun? Is it an adjective? And then extracting statistical measures to start looking at which words tend to come in which orders. This was applied with things like there was the Collins Co-built dictionary, it was developed from these kind of things, there's computational linguistics, and corpus linguistics, that kind of area. It's the sort of stuff that helps you statistically determine why do we say the quick brown fox, not the brown quick fox. So it has applications. So that kind of basic level of statistical work was then used in these text mining and content analysis. So text mining is particularly trying to identify those underlying patterns in grammar, in written text, and be able to exploit that. It can be used as a content analysis spans across a bit of a broad area here. You've got quite qualitative, interpretative, through to actually fairly statistical. So it can be, for example, what language, what terms, what words tend to be associated by particular newspapers with particular ethnic groups or particular religious groups or particular other countries. So that way you can start actually looking at what content tends to map. Also sentiment analysis. So being able to work out that that's good is an indicator of positive sentiment, that's bad is an indicator of negative sentiment, that's not bad is kind of mildly positive. So being not bad is important, but not is a qualifier. These tools were progressively incorporated into qualitative analysis software. So within something like NVivo Atlas TI, you have opportunities to say, I want to do a word frequency. I want to see which words appear before and after. I want to see kind of keywords in context. So these were incorporated there, but primarily qualitative analysis software is about taking text, usually, also images, also video, and essentially making notes about it. You can apply a label, which you can call a code, and then there's a whole sort of theoretical idea of what do the codes represent. Are they very concrete, this speaker, or is it an abstract idea? Somebody's talking about a sense of injustice. So that's the idea of this. But a lot of qualitative analysis was actually just being done in Office tools. People using Microsoft Word, using a highlighter, maybe using comments, underlining, or putting things into a tabulation in Excel. Now, looking at the audience, who remembers this guy? That's more of you than I expect. This is a bit of a line, isn't it? It's like holding up a tape and people go, what's that? Or a CD. Oh yeah, I know that, but what that weird cassette thing? Clipping. Clipping was introduced into Word. When you started writing dear, you would pop up and go, conversation, it looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like me to help? It had this whole conversational interface. It was unbelievably irritating. It was very, very limited. To the best of my knowledge, it never popped up and said, it looks like you're doing a qualitative analysis. Would you like me to find some thieves? It became an object of many jokes. Now, you've all talked, a lot of you know ChatGPT, so I'm assuming a lot of you have used that conversational interface. Now, this is being incorporated into Word, and it is offering skills and opportunities that have previously been in this area. Would you like me to compare these two documents in terms of the language, in terms of the structure, in terms of the topics, the themes? So we've kind of entered an age of super clipping, who is now just like Clippy with the interface, but I can do anything. And also claims to an extent to be sentient, to have intelligence. But really? So, this is, let's face it, this is what we're all worried about, isn't it? You know, to prove you're a human, click on all the photos that show places you would run for shelter during a robot uprising. That is the existential dread that is being put out with AI. Now, but we're getting this muddying of what do we mean by AI? Because the term AI is actually being applied to a whole range of stuff. So when this happens, if somebody said, when did it start in qualitative research? Using the Wayback Machine, I would say it's between the 8th and the 17th of October 2023. That's when the AI takeover happened. That is when the NVivo website went from saying, we have got richer insights and automated insights, kind of text mining, and we had an AI washing. All of a sudden, it was harness the power of AI in NVivo for qualitative analysis. This hasn't quite happened, but I'm convinced that this guy's going to turn into the Terminator. But actually no new tools had been developed. Nothing new was put into NViva at that stage. They just rebranded what was text mining and data mining software and called it AI. They have subsequently added a kind of ChatGPT interface. But you've suddenly, what is AI? Is now this like, well, it's anything, apparently. So one of the challenges here is, do people really understand what a large language model is doing compared with what it's being hyped as and what it appears to do? Now, I'm not going to go through this exhaustively. I will point you to this guide because it is so good. And I will hope I can find the screen and take you through this visual guide. So this is a visual guide that is on the FT. It's not behind the model. It's a very, very good visual guide to what large language models do. So basically, a large language model takes a sentence, breaks it down into tokens, and would then be able to look at that in terms of which words come before and after. So exactly the stuff AntConc and things like that we're doing with a human driving. From this, it can create statistical patterns of which words tend to come and which words don't come after other patterns of words, and can start working out vectors in terms of the likelihood of different words and different patterns of language. And it's trained on vast amounts of data. So it creates a statistical model, a large and complex statistical model. Now this stuff allows you to then start clustering the statistical, right, so we've got a cluster down here of some pronouns, we've got verbs for movement, places of work and so on, different clusters of nouns. And what it allows it to do is break up these words, look at the tokens and look at their relationships. Now the previous, those sort of text mining, data mining software would do it sequentially. The transformation that came with large language models was this idea of self-awareness, that suddenly it can look at all of it all at once and do a very, very good job of building a much, much richer data set, much richer statistical models that then allow spotting that the bank's interest rates refers to interest rates, whereas I have no interest in hearing about the interest rates of the bank is about whether you're interested in it versus a financial thing. So this is what the transformer did. And it allows it, which allows not only analysis of large amounts of language, but also generating it. So I'm literally go through this quickly. Fundamentally, it's that. Tokenization, break it to tokens, look at their embedding, their positioning, self-attention, and then be able to create encoded output. But that encoded output is a statistical model of language. It's us who interpret meaning. The large language model is able to generate synthetic text that appears to be meaningful and to come up with a probability. The Financial Times is, each of these is true, but which is the most likely? Well, actually, it is a newspaper found it. So all of those are true answers. It will assign a probability. But what that probability is often obfuscated and sometimes, commercially sensitive. So I would really suggest having a look at the guide. It's a brilliant, brilliant guide. And if you ever need to explain it to other people, it's there, it's on the FT. And if you just Google for generative AI exists because of the transformer. So it's been trained on vast amounts of just scraped data. Rather than building a careful corpus of data and doing that and as human assembling it so it's representative, it just scrapes vast amounts of the internet without permission. So OpenAI was claiming that AI training is impossible without copyrighted material. All of a sudden, copyright does matter. when DeepSeek comes along and you're like, it nicked our code. You're like, hang on, you trained your code on stolen stuff. But this idea of whose work is being used, is it representative? Who's distorted? I mean, if you're scraping Reddit, you're basically scraping Gammon, the Gammon perspective of the world. So what we're starting to deal with is fundamental to qualitative research, and that's the ethical issues. Christina.
Thank you. So the ethical issues, those of us who do qualitative research, we think about ethics all the time in terms of how we set up and undertake and report our projects. And Steve has mentioned some of the ethical issues in relation to the development of large language models already, but there's also the issue of the exploitation of humans in developing those models. And the idea of model collapse. The more text that is generated by models is fed back into the training of the model, and that has some implications also that we as qualitative researchers need to think about. In my experience, the most frequently asked question in the context of qualitative research and the use of generative AI is to do with the security and privacy of the qualitative materials that we use in our projects. Different tools have different security standards around that, and it's not a given that your data is necessarily secure, so that's something really important you need to think about. For me, the concept of informed consent is really changing in terms of what that actually means now. Historically, we've been gathering informed consent from participants in order to record their words and so on, but now we need to think about asking them about how we do the analysis and whether they feel comfortable about their experiences being analysed using AI. And that's a discussion which isn't happening as much as it should be, in my opinion. And then, of course, we also have a number of environmental and social costs of the use of large language models. If you haven't looked into it already, it would be a good idea to find out what the how much water and electricity is used when you every time you go to ChatGPT. So for these sorts of reasons, for many qualitative researchers, generative AI in this space is considered to be an abomination. And there are many qualitative researchers who just won't go anywhere near it because of all of these ethical issues. All right, moving away from that, I want to talk a little bit about the actual capabilities. What does this generative AI technology allow us to do in terms of analysing qualitative materials that we couldn't do previously? And there are kind of 5 core capabilities that we're going to discuss with you today. So first of all, of course, the generate aspect, the idea that we can use models to get ideas for our projects and also to create data, that we can converse with our data through that chat interface that Steve talked about, so we can ask questions about our data via that interface. We can summarize. Summarization is one of the core capabilities of these technologies, and that allows us to reduce our data by condensing it based on the form of the data. We can convert one thing from another using these models. And we can label things. So what we're going to do is break those down all down a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But I want to think about that in terms of a kind of typical qualitative research process, if you like. So you might not agree with all of these particular phases, but generally speaking, this is a sort of generalized process that we might go through. So how do these different capabilities intersect with that? Well, this Sankey diagram shows us that each of those 5 capabilities has a potential role at multiple stages of the process. Okay. Every time I look at this, I think I could redraw it and put different lines different places. So it's not so much about the detail about where each line goes to, it's more about the idea that each of these capabilities has a potential role at multiple stages of the research process. And that brings me on to something that I've called qualitative deepfake, the idea that it is possible already and has been for a while to undertake a whole qualitative research project from start to finish using generative AI with minimal or no human intervention, okay? And that reality is a serious thing for us to consider as a community of qualitative researchers. And again, for many people, that's why they would answer our question by saying that this constitutes an, I can't say that word, I've got to learn how to say it, abomination. Which brings us on to the idea of fabrication, which is a really key idea that you may have heard in the media.
So this is one of the biggest differences, I guess, from when we gave this talk a year ago, when we were talking about qualitative deepfake as if it's imminent, it might happen. I've had it. I've had a straight up project come in on a module that I was teaching last semester, entirely generated, the whole thing by AI. Now, because it was within the sense of assessed work, the idea of assessment immediately starts to frame it back in those like doomsday discourses. So it came in as formative assessment. So it was giving feedback and it was being shared with peers as peer review. And actually the student said, oh, I've now looked at peers' work, can I pull this paper please? Because I don't really want it to be reviewed by my peers. This is on a medical education program in a module about professionalism. And so I went to go and look at it and withdraw it and immediately spotted, turn it in, has this AI detection, and it said 97% detected as AI. AI generated 97%. It's now added an extra thing. AI generated text that was AI paraphrased. So there's like there's a kind of war, a sort of going on between AI generation, AI detection, AI generation, AI detection. It's like this arms race between the two. But this immediately just made me fascinated. And I went and looked, and we've got text. Thematic analysis of qualitative data revealed 3 core themes. Participants expressed a growing recognition that empathy is not innate, can be cultivated through deliberate effort. One student reflected, empathy isn't just about feeling, but patience, about demonstrating and understanding how you communicate with them carefully. And I was like, my immediate thought, how did you do this research without going through ethics? The whole point here was you weren't going to go out and do research. Actually, you were going to talk with your other participants on this module. So I went back to ask them. All of it was generated by AI. It was synthetic personality, synthetic character, just created quotes. They basically put in the entire research project. Here's what I wanted to do: generate quotes, give me a thematic analysis. The whole thing generated by ChatGPT. And my immediate thought, this is in assessing, is this is fabrication of data. You have fabricated that data. What are you doing? And I talked to some colleagues. Thankfully, it's formative. So actually, there was an opportunity to go back and go, sorry, what the hell were you doing? Which led, and I've had to reflect back on this, because ultimately, it was this big question, how the hell do I respond? So I went back to the student, asked what they were doing, and I ended up asking them to write a reflective piece about what were you doing and why. And they basically said, well, I couldn't do the research I wanted to do because of the time and because of the ethical things. I wanted to go and do this research, but I couldn't because we didn't have time and we didn't have ethical clearance. So I asked ChatGPT to simulate it. And I've not done qualitative research before, so I wanted to do that. So their view was they were simulating research. And actually, teaching qualitative analysis is amazing. You can create data straight off and go, there you go. Do you want to go and do some analysis? You could learn it. You've got genuine relevant data instead of, here's a training data set, let's go and look at, there's some island off of the coast of America if we went in vivo. There was the one about Sherlock Holmes if we went out. So these sort of data sets where you didn't get the data, you didn't understand it, you didn't care. I was in a mindset of, this is fabrication. They were thinking it was simulation. So it was their own reflections that really helped kind of crystallize 2 elements of the challenge here. One thing was to say, if it was used, it should be listed in authorship. Yes. The fundamental mistake or problem, they hadn't been explicit about how they had used it. Once they were explicit about how they would use it, and I was able to go, simulation, that's actually really clever what you've done there, well done. But the slightly worrying side is, I therefore believe it's easier if not used at all. So their kind of conclusion was, I shouldn't go near this because it's been framed by assessment as fabrication. And that's part of the idea of these talks, is we need to move beyond this, you mustn't, or it's great, and actually explore the nuance. So, how is it being used? What is the software doing? Christine.
So this is a very complicated slide that I'm not going to talk about in detail, but just to give you a sense of what's happening with these capabilities in different tools. So Atlas TI, Max QDA and NVivo are probably the most well-known qualitative software programs that have been around for a long time. And they've now incorporated those capabilities I mentioned earlier in a variety of different ways. We've also got a few others coming on the scene more recently. Qualcoder is a free qualitative software program, actually. WordStats sits in that text mining tradition rather than the purest qualitative space, and they have recently, within the last couple of weeks, started to integrate things. And they also develop a qualitative module called QJ Miner, which they're about to bring out all of these similar sorts of capabilities. And alongside those established Cactus packages that have been around since the mid-1980s, there are literally a plethora of new applications which have emerged in the last couple of years. Here I've just got 5 examples up there, but there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens, and they are generative AI only tools designed for qualitative analysis. The most important thing about this comparison is that in those new tools, there is no coding. So the qualitative coding of materials is not happening in this new space. And for some people, that constitutes a step change because it's really changing the way that we think about going about doing qualitative analysis. Those of you who've done qualitative analysis before, who's done coding? Okay, coding is the bedrock of how we have historically analysed qualitative materials, and in these new apps, there is no coding. So let's break it down a little bit further. So we're going to go back to each of these and just make a few comments about that step change versus abomination issue. So first of all, converting. So transcription is the classic converting one thing into another for qualitative research. And in terms of step change, the technology has radically improved in terms of accuracy and speed. And depending on which platform you use, you can now have pauses, pronunciation, and all kinds of different capabilities there, including in some options, different choices about which large language model it's using. The other side of that coin is what we call algorithmic discrimination. So not all languages are equally well served in this field, especially particular accents. Homogenization of method, the idea that if you're leaning on automated transcripts, that's a verbatim transcript. So what about all of the non-verbal interaction and information? So if everybody's starting to use these tools, then that leads to just working only with verbatim transcripts, and that has a loss of the non-verbal, of course. And then the kind of other side of things is it depends on which tool you're using. So there's lots and lots and lots of these tools. The general purpose tools tend to be not so secure, not so accurate, whereas the bespoke tools for qualitative research tend to be more refined in terms of what's happening. So there's lots to unpack there in terms of AI transcription. Who can just throw out an adjective? Who's done transcription themselves manually? What's a word you would use to describe that? So in terms of sentiment analysis, I always get negative sentiment going on when I ask that question. Okay, but I want you to be thinking about what you're losing when you don't do the transcription yourself, because you are losing things as well as gaining things. Okay, so let's move on to the next capability, which is summarization, which Steve, I think you're going to talk about that.
So when it comes up, I did bits of conversation analysis. So conversation analysis is kind of masochist's version of transcription, where you just start timing the pauses, marking the overlaps, really getting super geeky and producing a transcript no one else can read. But that stuff is there for a purpose, but it's kind of lost. But summarization. This is probably the bit that we see the most. I think this is one of the reasons why AI is being massively hyped. My broad opinion is people who write stuff that they don't expect anyone to read love it because it can generate it and they can summarize it. But we see this idea that it's very, very much becoming normalised. So if you go on Amazon now, you don't need to read all of the Amazon reviews because Amazon will summarise it and go, customers appreciate the chair's comfort. Most people said it was quite good, but one said it's absolutely awful. It gives very quick summaries to key content. It's generally very well written. And it does identify content patterns. So that kind of initial summarisation of what was this interview about, it's pretty good at. But this challenge of conflating form and content, can you ask the model to say, well, what was included and what was excluded from your summary? That's kind of not there. That ability to query what the model used, those essentially prediction scores. But really the hype around this is conflating method, meaning and content, i.e. find themes. But a theme isn't a statistical average of a load of customer reviews who generally said it's okay. A theme is about an interpretative act. It's an intellectual concept. Quite good is not a theme. Whereas customers appreciate the chair's comfort, quality and ease of assembly, it looks like a theme, but is it? It's just a kind of amalgamation. And I think this is a real challenge. I genuinely wonder that it's going to reopen sort of a Pandora's box of people going, but this is actually better because it's objective. Because you are just subjectively interpreting this. But that human interpretation of meaning and what's important is the point of qualitative research. If you just turn it into a kind of like, here's a statistical average of some content, you've thrown away the most fundamental thing. So it depends, to a large extent, on the purpose of the stage. That initial thing, what was the overview of this interview? Brilliant. What does the interview mean? Hang on, that's a different question. So when are you using it? How are you using it? And what are you interpreting out of it is key. So as an example, if you're doing, say, a staff survey or a student survey, what's the point of it? Is it to average the amount of hay in the haystack and give you a bale that represents it? Or is it to find the needle that is important? Because if that needle is actually a whistleblower, that's important. If you're doing a staff survey or a student survey and it says, look, there's actually really horrendous abuse going on and we've got this terrible bully, only one person says it and it's lost. That surely is the reason to do a staff survey, is to identify good practice, bad practice, the special. So yes, finding a needle in a haystack, it's not about just give me a bale of hay, and that's where it's important. So if that's summarisation, what about coding and classification?
So that's what we're referring to as labelling when we think about generative AI. Qualitative coding is about capturing the conceptual meaning that we see in the data, but we also categorise the characteristics of the data and the participants who contribute to our qualitative projects. And again, the discourses around how generative AI can feed into this space is the idea that coding can happen a lot quicker when we're using generative AI. So another tedious task can be taken over, allowing us time to do other things. But we want to raise the issue that that will be relevant for the manifest or explicit content in qualitative materials, not for the interpretive meaning, as Steve alluded to when talking about summarisation as well. We also want to think about the extent to which content-based labelling is actually coding, which is a really important thing. So lack of interpretation. These are similar themes that relate to the summarisation as well. And this idea that what we need when we do qualitative research isn't artificial intelligence, but interpretive intelligence. That's what we hold high in our qualitative spaces. The other thing I want to say about this idea of labelling is, are we using these generative AI capabilities to fix a problem that we didn't really have. What was the problem with coding? And what is it that the generative AI is trying to fix? So we need to think about what we're labeling, and actually all of the things that we're being told that AI coding can fix for us had already been fixed by text mining capabilities and could have been done equally, if not better, previously. So it's almost like we're looking to find a solution to a problem that didn't really exist, or a problem that we already had a solution to. And I think you're going to bring that up with this example.
So we often think about coding in terms of like very, very interpretative, but coding can be many, many things. So if you were doing things about like a language level, you might want to be looking at specific words, specific phrases. Now, there's stuff that you should be able to find out and computers should be good at. Like counting letters and counting spaces and counting numbers is kind of what computers are good at now. So you could write a script, if you're any good at writing scripts, you should be able to write a script that goes like identify all the words with the letter T in it, or a capital letter. Or you could ask Copilot, how many letter T's are there in, how many words in the previous paragraph have 2 T's in it? And it came up with a letter, including interface. Now, how many letter T's are there in the word interface? The word interface contains 2 instances of the letter T, which led me to ask, well, where, pray tell, are those 2 instances? I would love to know. And it authoritatively told me the 2 instances of the letter T in are at the 4th and 7th positions, because that's number 4 and that's number 7. What? And this is like exposing the underlying. It can't acknowledge what it's doing. So this is a way of provoking a hallucination. But this is a hallucination of the sort of thing computers were good at before AI came along. I went, I reckon it's got 3 T's. You can do great fun things like this, like ask it how many presidents of the USA had the letter N, whatever, in their name. And it will look at entire paragraphs of text and go, yes, Tony Blair has 2 letter T's in his name. Really? So this is that was a conversation. That's using and exploiting the conversational interface. It's a really easy way of doing that. Writing out the script quite hard. This conversational interface is so, so key. It's such a new way of interacting with a computer. Having a chat is our natural mode of engaging with the world. Learning how to do database queries is not. So conversation is just this really easy way to explore ideas. And it's been around for a while, this idea of research, the dialogue of your ideas and the evidence. Charles Reagan was writing about this in '94. It's a metaphor I love. But whenever I've been teaching people how to use it in Vivo or Atlas TI, I've always kind of got them to do this in a conversational way. It's like, write down what you want to find in natural language. I think that generally the staff from sociology are grumpier than the staff from psychology. Right, how are you going to query that? And then you work it out and you translate it into a query. So it's a conversational mode, but it is about learning how to do database queries, which aren't easy. Just writing the prompt is easy. But are they repeatable or consistent? Database queries will return the same data. If you have run your query in NVivo and you run it again, it will return the same data. You can save the query and you can convincingly say, yes, it got all of that stuff. Can you ask for the opposite? So one thing you can do is say, show me the data that was coded, show me the data that wasn't coded. And that's a really important query to run in things like Atlas TI or NVivo. Can you genuinely do that conversation? What did you not look at? And this idea that you've lost an audit, you've replaced documentation with a black box. It's a big trick. Is it the Turing test? Or is it going to be the next layer of the Turing test, where it's like convincing the examiner that he's a computer? But this idea is there that somehow it's a representation of intelligence, because historically having a conversation with something that gives a response to us has been a conversation with an intelligence. So it depends on the interpretation. It could open up a new, quick, intuitive and really exploratory way of exploring a data. It's fun, it's easy. That's why people love ChatGPT and it's been used. But it could equally become a substitution for rigor of process. So coming back to this hallucinations, this is one of my favourite things. Somebody created a clock where ChatGPT will write a rhyme. So as the clock strikes 11:42, I rhyme the time as I always do. So it'll always generate a rhyme, but you're never quite sure if the time is correct because it prioritises the rhyme over the actual time. So it's a kind of art project to remind you of the fact this is a hallucination. Great fun thing, but you would never use this to get your train. Oh, I don't know what time it is. Is it 11:42? No, it's 2:57. This one has been promoted. We can simplify text. So there's an original, trailing his ash plant, by his side its ferule followed lightly on the path, squealing at his heels, which can be simplified down to he dragged his walking stick beside him. It made a noise on the ground. That's from Ulysses by James Joyce. That's their illustration. I would cautiously suggest that if you want to read Ulysses, it's for the language, not for a kind of Dick and Jane version of Peter and Jane like the dog. I like the walking stick, it has a ferule. This idea of simplification, is it a good one? Now, I think there are some academic papers where this would be a very good thing. But I would hesitate to suggest that Ulysses is a great example. But this is all about what we value.
And values are really important when we're doing qualitative research. I think we all know that. I'm going to read out this quote because it's such a great quote by Emily Bender. If you don't know Professor Emily Bender, she writes lots of really excellent stuff around AI and has a podcast as well. Professor Bender says, if you put enough training data into a large language model, it can spit out text on any topic. Absolutely true. And so you can easily fool yourself into thinking that it can do something useful on these topics. But as soon as the outcome matters, as soon as the truthfulness and groundedness of that text matters to anybody, it's clear that it can't. And I think for qualitative researchers, that's a really key issue, okay? Because when does it matter what's being spat out from our analysis? I would suggest that it always matters, okay? And so that's the crux of why the values and the ethics and all of these capabilities that we see before us are really important, because as Helen Cara reminds us always, if you don't follow Helen Cara, you should follow Helen Cara's work as well. Their ethics are everywhere. And in qualitative research, ethics are really important in everything that we do. And that's just as important with the tools that we use in anything else. So the reality check for qualitative researchers, this is all about, you know, what all of these new capabilities mean for the field moving forward. And that brings us up to thinking very clearly about what is that problem that we're trying to solve. So I suggested earlier that maybe we're being given a solution to a problem that we didn't actually have. And I think we need to step back and think, what is the problem in qualitative research that we need to solve, and use tools to help us do that, rather than just look around and say, okay, there's loads of these new tools, how should we use them?
So this is one of my favourite figures, the impossible triangle. This is pretty much everything you want to get done in life. So if your car's broken, do you want it fixed really well, but really quickly? That's going to cost you money. It's going to need 3-4 mechanics prioritising that work. Do you want it done really well, but cheaply? Well, that's going to take time. So it's probably your mate doing it at mate's rates, but he'll fit it in around other work. Or do we go with the, you know, I want a cheap job done quickly? We all know the cost of that is quality. And this, at the moment, AI tends to be being positioned along, it's quicker and it's got no extra cost. But by the way, ignore that bit, because it can do the quality fine. We are asking you to question that. It is very, very rare you can get all three. You've got to pick two and look at the one that you're being compromised. So we can think about some of the options there. I can definitely think, and I think that will be an opportunity for discussion after this. What are the problems we would like it to fix rather than what is the solution that we are being sold? So, going back to the question from earlier, what do you think? We've got the QR code back up.
So this is a different question. We want you to answer one question, I believe, here. Everyone got the QR code? Not quite. Most people have now. Whilst you're answering that question, we'll give you the results of that question in a moment. But I just want to round up by concluding that, in our opinion, well, I don't want to talk for you, you can talk for yourself, but in my opinion, there's not one answer to that question, okay? So the question of the role and implication of generative AI on qualitative research, I think, depends on a variety of different things. So first of all, we need to think very much about the methodological appropriateness. Qualitative research is happening in lots of different sectors, lots of different spaces, as we talked about earlier. So depending on where you're working and how you're working and what you're doing, there will be a different answer to those questions. Then we've also got the idea about what the objectives are. So research evaluation policy objectives may be quite different, topic focus type, all of that kind of thing as well. And also this idea about, can anyone do QDA now? We have a lack of guidelines around this. So lots of people are asking all the time, where are the guidelines about how to use these tools properly? We haven't yet got those, but hopefully they'll be coming soon. And then there's also an issue about sector. So in market research and industry contexts, lots and lots of qualitative work is happening using these tools. And that raises the question about whether other qualitative researchers, specifically academics, are being left behind. Whether that matters or not, or that's an issue, is a different question. But these are all things that we'd quite like to hear your thoughts on in the discussion, and we're very close to finishing up. But I think Steve's got one last thing to say.
So this would be my suggestion for you. If you want one practical take home, if you've got a parrot spitting text at you, be a bit more pirate about it. So when you're reading AI generated text, have a prompt. So this is your challenge. Go make yourself a little parrot pinata. Leave the newspaper visible. What you are seeing is papier-mâché. Now, often they say, well, we'll improve the text. Instead of just using Reddit, we'll use the Financial Times. Great, you've now got pink papier-mâché. But it's still papier-mâché, it's just synthetic text. Yes, if you create papier-mâché, you might get a really interesting sentence you've never seen before. But it is a papier-mâché sentence. But I would probably put a load of sweets in it, so that when you get AI junk, you can smash that parrot up and at least have some sweets to make you feel a bit better about yourself. But fundamentally, stick it on top of your monitor. And when you're reading AI text, remember it's a parrot that's spitting it out at you. When a parrot speaks, you don't think it's intelligent, it knows what it's saying, you just think it's a very clever parrot and somebody trained it very well. It's a great metaphor for what synthetic text is. So,
we've got one more question. We are researchers, so we've got one final question.
Always.
One more question.
One last question.
And then we will show you the responses to your previous questions, and then open it up to, where's my one more question? Oh, there's my one more question.
I think you need to be on Wi-Fi. If you're not on Wi-Fi, it's me.
Oh, have you been having problems?
Only me. I have quite an old phone.
We will give you. Do you want to see the results to the what do you think question? I need to hand that over to my technical assistant. We'll bring the other. If you want the slides, you can download the slides.
Is it?
Oh, I think you need to click on the link first, because it was all very high tech.
Yeah, I was talking to
Until the tech broke.
Yeah. Right, there we go. Ooh.
So this is the question. Oh, this is the. What about the previous question? I want to know the abomination step change question, folks. Can you get me back to that one? That's the what do you think question. It's 2 questions. Sorry, Tina.
Well, I've just checked that tea and coffee has arrived, so I'm pleased to report it has. So have about 25 minutes for questions and answers, and then we can carry on chatting to each other and to Christina and Steve over tea, coffee.
So we've got some polarisation. Did we use the word polarisation at the beginning of
No, we need more of that.
No?
We need to use for polarisation more. It's a
Oh,
good
more.
word.
But look. In this room? Interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, Steve. Super fascinating, and I can see the difference since June. I really can. So thank you. That's very, very insightful. Quite the journey. Not sure whether I have simulation or fabrication in my head, or parrot or abomination. Not sure what I'm really going to go home with. But over to you. Questions. Who wants to kick off? You raise your hand, maybe quickly say where you're from, and then if not, I have a few.
So I've been doing my research about bias against towards AI systems from sort of humans, and I think another big factor is research as a whole is sort of in our DNA to be as trustworthy and transparent as possible. And I think the idea with AI hallucinating and making up stuff, and then also the fact that all these models are based on scrape data already, if we as researchers were to use it, it's almost like going back on that promise that you're making to sort of say oh, we're doing everything ethically, because when we know that the systems behind it aren't necessarily ethical.
I think there's something really challenging here as well. I think that's where the ethics bit comes in. That it's we're dealing with people who would unethically scrape vast amounts of data and are then going, just trust us, honest. We won't be. You can put your data into this, and we won't look at it. Just trust us. We won't. So I think that there are so many complex things about who is actually behind this. What I found kind of ironic about some of the outcry and the response to DeepSeek was it was one of the most open systems so far. It was it's open source. You can actually go and see what we've done. We're still not going to tell you what it's trained on, and that's fundamentally the challenge. I think both me and Christina were talking earlier about there was something in the earlier data mining that was just really good. It's we will train it. We know what it's been trained on. We have selected the data. We have put it in. We've trained it, and now we can get it to go and classify further data. And you got reliable results where you could see where they came from. That obfuscation that's going on, I think, is the massive challenge. Hopefully, we can take something that is a bit more ethically trained and then use it in a manner a bit more like those supervised training. But I don't know if you've seen the article that's been in Nature just recently. We put it on the links on there, which is about the gap between what people think AI does compared with what it does. It's such an interesting paper, and it's so key, I think, to understand.
I've not read it, but it definitely sounds interesting. Even my family don't really understand what AI is. It's my sister had a history project that she had to do, and I was just use ChatGPT to get your references. Found perfect references, but obviously it's because it's making them all up on the spot. And I had to explain that to my dad, which I thought my dad was fairly tech savvy in that sense. But
that's why that FT guide is a really good one to kind of point people to, because it does take you through it and oh right, that's what it does.
I think it's the what you're alluding to also is the black box issue. So historically, before all of this generative AI stuff came onto the scene, I would often say, historically, qualitative researchers haven't been very good at describing how they got from their transcripts to their final report. And that was understandable when we didn't have any technology to help us do analysis, because illustrating how you do analysis when you've got highlighter pen and scissors is quite difficult. When you're using something like NVivo or MaxQDA, it's much easier because you can show this is exactly what I did and here's how everything links up. And that's something that we've been able to do for a long time, but still qualitative researchers are not always very good at doing that. as soon as you start using something like generative AI, the black box comes in again because nobody really knows how it's happened. And I think that is a real issue for the legitimacy of what we do as qualitative researchers in the context of, often our work is undermined anyway. And now we're in the situation where there's a lack of understanding about how these things work, as you say, and the idea that anybody can do it because ChatGPT can do it. So why do we even need qualitative researchers? So I think these are really urgent questions that as a community of practice, we really need to think about.
There's someone here in green, I think. Shall we take the two together?
Hi, thanks very much. That's really interesting. So I work in the Department of Business and Trade. And one thing that's kind of come out in the last year is the incubator for artificial intelligence. The central government have released a consultation tool.
Yeah.
So for using large language models and AI to try to analyze public consultations. I'm just so curious what your thoughts are on that. I have lots of thoughts, but
yeah, so that's called consults,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
So we haven't seen sight of that as we don't work but I think that does very similar things to what we've been talking about today, because essentially it's on a platform, so it's part of a platform where you're collecting consultation responses on a policy or whatever it might be, and then the tool is doing the analysis, which is very, very similar to what we've been talking about, but happening in a closed system, which is much more secure than if you were using any of these other.
Yeah, it's totally locked down, but I'm kind of just curious, like, do you think that we should be using stuff like this on public consultations? Like, I've thoughts on, the thing like the needle in the haystack, that kind of stuff. But
I think that's where the accountability comes from, because once you're dealing with one of the challenges of qualitative has always been the idea of scaling. So tools like QDA Miner were really, really good at scaling up to large data sets, but they didn't hide the idea going, you know what, you're going to have to train it. And it's that human supervised training is kind of what they said, I don't need to do that anymore. It's like, are you sure? Because that's it. And again, there's another paper that's literally just come out in Nature, I think this week, which is about, I don't know if you know the Clever Hans effect. So Clever Hans was the horse that could do maths. And it was an amazing thing. It toured all around Germany, and it was shown everywhere. And so it's this known effect. And you could ask it a number, and it would get the answer absolutely correct. And they were like, we don't get it. And it was all picking up very subtle cues from the person asking the question. It wasn't the trainer. They moved him out and said, well, it's not the trainer, it must be the horse. And it took a long time to break it down. Eventually, the horse was taken to World War I and probably eaten. So he didn't have a happy end. But they are basically going like, this is what you see with AI. It gives an answer that looks meaningful. And so therefore, we impute knowledge to it. But where is the other? And I think that's where it becomes really key to go, what wasn't included? Show me the stuff that doesn't match that. And that you could do with QDA Miner and those kind of supervised tools. If we can bring those together, I think that would be brilliant.
It's also about what you're aiming to do with those tools. So my opinion is if I'm seeking to replace the human interpreter, that's very different from assisting. Those kinds of metaphors I think are really important to think about. So I would say in direct response to should we be using that kind of tool, if you're using it so that you don't have to do any of the interpretive work anymore, then I think that's potentially a problem. But if you're using it to speed up certain things or to get a general overview of certain things before you then go in and do other more human interpretive work, then you're getting the AI to assist your process, which is a very different thing. So we didn't really talk about that very much in this session, but I think that's really important. And there's lots of different ways that authors are talking about that. So you might have heard the term human in the loop. So that's one aspect of thinking about that.
Both of you.
thank you. So much food for thought. So I work for a social innovation charity called Nesta, and we're actively working with generative AI across the whole spectrum, including AI-powered chatbots that do interviews at scale. And we grapple with a lot of these questions, but also think about how we can put it in the time space. And that human in the loop is something really key. We're testing these different things. For us, the things about like like you were saying, that qualitative deepfakes and generative data sets is something we are actively testing and using. So it's not a one-off, it's something that we're actively working with. With that human in the loop, do you think it's possible to move towards something where we have this type of generative AI integration throughout the entire research process in a way that's ethical? Or do you think there's, especially if it's developed, I guess, like in-house in a way, because the things we're doing are developed in-house, we know the breadcrumb trail, I guess you would say. Or do you think there's still potential issues with that?
I think I'd probably answer that question in two ways. So in terms of the in-house develop, for me, it's the data security issue when it's in-house is much less, obviously, because you've got control over that. But it's also about what models you're using. So whether the models themselves are also developed in-house, which is very, very expensive at the moment. But I think there's a movement towards that in lots of different organisations. Which is really important. So if the models are trained in an ethical way on data that's relevant to the task that you're going to put the model to, which of course the OpenAI models are not trained on data that's relevant to what we do as social researchers. But I think there will be more of a trend towards that kind of thing. That doesn't get over the ethical issues of things like the environmental impact of the models, which is the other side of the process. So that's the first thing I would say. I would feel much more comfortable of using models if I knew how and on what they were developed in the first place. In terms of the whole qualitative research workflow, at the moment, most of the tools are just tapping into one particular part of the research workflow. So you talked about AI bots to generate interview data and things like that. They tend to be quite separate from the analytical thing at the moment, although we're starting to see some platforms that are doing multiple things. So I think that's going to be changing as well. I mean, in the next 10 years, it's going to be, we're going to be doing this work in a completely different way, I think. And I think that's why it's really important as social researchers working in all of the different sectors and contexts that we all do to be contributing to the development of those tools. But there's not much dialogue going. So we've heard already some examples of very similar things probably happening in lots of different spaces in a not very joined up way. And I think maybe there's lots of reinventing of the same wheel happening in lots of those different places. So that's not really very efficient. But I think there's understandable reasons for that.
I think I would really, we picked up Professor Emily Bender. If you don't know her, she was the author of the stochastic parrots paper that led to the cohort with people from Google who were then fired from Google for asking the wrong questions. So she knows her stuff. She did a brilliant podcast. I cannot recommend Mystery AI Hype Theatre 3000 podcast highly enough. But they're linked to the Distributed AI Research Network, who are a brilliant network to that. Those are the people I connect to because they are doing a lot of thinking about how can we be ethical. And they really advocate for this idea that AI can be the most amazing tool if you have it with relevant data and you've thought about it. Just don't take the tech bros hype that we can replace everything. It will do anything at all. That's the problem. I mean, yeah.
Has anybody else got their hand up? Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. I was teaching. So I'm from the University of Manchester. And I was fascinated by the needle in the haystack, but I'm going to have an off-camera conversation with you about that because I've got a reason to ask. But you mentioned AI as assisting, right? Do you have thoughts about the use of AI for students? So think about training students to be future researchers, not necessarily qualitative researchers. You know, there's no sort of consensus, as far as I can see, across the sector in terms of the use of AI, the appropriate use of AI. Based on your thinking, what should we take from where we currently are with regards to the use of Gen AI in student assessments? Let's just make it about assessments.
So having had this experience, I mean, bringing in formative assignments. Now, this isn't a postgraduate course, but it's not small. bringing in formative assignments has been the kind of transformational thing, because when you're in with a formative assignments, they can come in and I've had students who have done really terrible use of AI through to fantastically clever use of AI. And then the question has been, have you acknowledged it? And it's basically going back and going, right, put in an appendix giving absolute detail of how you used it, what you did. And I've had some, I mean, it's given me some amazing data. I've got like appendices where somebody said like, this is what I did, this is how Grammarly changed it, and this is why I accepted it. You know, that's what we want to know. But I think we don't have enough formative, but the key thing with formative is you don't go straight into an academic misconduct process. Whereas that project that I was showing there, if that had have come in summatively, it would have gone straight into academic misconduct and the entire thing would have been totally different. But because it was formative, I was able to go, you know, in the nicest possible way, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And then they came back and really set it out, and it's brilliant.
I think you're really onto something, and that's really interesting. But what if you're an academic who doesn't have your depth of knowledge about Gen AI, who's you know, fumbling through?
Oh, I was mostly working out of like Turnitin's detection algorithm, but I was able to look at it. But I think this is getting quite off. I think this is one of the things that people are framing out, and one of the challenges is that AI use in universities is being framed so much by this assessment question that the use in research is almost getting framed within that as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's problematic. It really took me to step out of it and step away and go, that was an amazing piece of simulation, well done. Whereas initially I was like, you're cheating. This is fabrication. And it's the same thing, it's always indeterminate, but we've got to be really careful how we're framing these things. And those discourses are so powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel we'll end up with a place where nobody wants to use it because they're so worried that they're going to be had up in their
I think your honesty in that example was absolutely brilliant, really grounded it. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just add one quick thing to that, is that it's not just about what the students are doing. I think you started saying, yeah, but what about us teachers who don't know? So universities should be making sure that their staff do know, because we are now in this world, we can't hide behind it. And so there's a responsibility of the institutions to upskill the faculty in order that they can know what's appropriate and what's not, rather than just saying blank, you know, lots of universities have got blanket no AI. It's nonsense. Yeah, it just means that people are hiding it, and we've got to be transparent about it. Sorry.
We've got two more questions, one here, any more, three? All right, we'll make sure we take those three together. Any more? Right, those three together, and then final answers, because team copies.
Yeah, okay.
So I work as an independent researcher, so we quite small scale research and evaluation projects. And I'd love to take my interviews, feed them into AI and say, can you analyse these and write me a research or evaluation report and see what it comes out with and compare that with what I've done myself. I think that, because that would really highlight some of the dangers, differences. I wondered if you know if that's been done.
Wait, hang on.
I have more comments, so maybe perhaps.
No. If we take the three together and you can remember them.
So this is a reflection when you were chatting about kind of tailored AIs that have been in certain data. I work in the humanitarian sector, and we work a lot around localising humanitarian response, trying to ensure that local voices are really driving response to crises. We actually work with but something we're trying to do, and what we've done basically is a lot of data is now bleeding, and a lot of the ways that our kind of national partners are working with data is using AI, because it's very quick, it's low resource sensing everything. Which is actually undermining a lot of the work we're doing to try and really prioritise local knowledge and Indigenous knowledge. So recently we did some work with an organisation that's feeding AIs with Indigenous philosophies, and we kind of did an exercise where we fed some of the questions that some of our partners have been asking around humanitarian response into this AI that we built using Indigenous philosophy to just compare and contrast as an exercise to show this is what the response can look like when we actually hone in on the data that's coming from local voices, and this is what it's looking like when we put into ChatGPT and what we're listing here. And it was so kind of illuminating to really demonstrate that in that space. And I think that's an exercise we can all do, really. as researchers, but also in all the other fields, is trying to kind of fact check ourselves with people we're working with. And there are resources out there. So I reckon it's got a whack in AI, which is interesting.
I would really urge you to get in touch with the people behind the Mystery Science AI Theatre, because that they get people in on the podcast, and that sounds like the most amazing kind of project to get out there and that will reach people. So I mean, I would love to hear more about it, but I think find that route out, definitely.
I second that. That's a question. Yeah, this is devil's advocate question, really. Would you ever use generative AI for your qualitative research if, for example, you were doing piece of consultancy where you had to get some quick results out for focus groups, for instance?
Yeah, definitely. Straight up, absolutely straight up. Yeah.
Would you use NVivo with?
No. Sorry, that's too quick, wasn't it? So if I wanted to be able to use my computer for anything else, I wouldn't use NVivo, but that's a personal thing about it. It's just written so bad. I'd use that with AI on Max QDA. I would use NVivo if that's what I had to use, but I would use AI without a doubt. Because, but what you're asking, if I understand your question, if you want quick answers, I would use it very, very quickly to give quick answers and then say, those are not the final answers, but those are a quick overview. Because I think at that early stage, I use it, I love it. I absolutely love the ability to take, Colin Ryan, vast amounts of like really long, 3-hour ramble. Oh my God, they were rambling interviews. He's from religious studies, so there's no structure or you know, there's no method. It's just to have a chat with people. 3 hours. Can you summarise that? Thank you. Oh, it's that interview that I want to find. Right, out of that interview, where does he talk about? And then it would allow me to find the bits that were relevant out of a 30-page transcript of somebody literally rambling on. Within it, there was a bit that I really wanted to read myself and look at and explore. That's where AI is absolutely brilliant. But that bit about the accountability is what I want to see. So what I would love to see in something like NVivo Max QDA would be to say, I don't want to see the transcripts anymore. I want to be able to say, show me the bits of transcript where the probability, your accuracy measure is lower. Play those back to me so I can correct them. Because they have an accuracy score in the underlying code, but you can't code for that. But you can say, oh, that's 97%. I'm fine with 97, but you know the bits where it was like 80%, you're like, I think he said that, but I'm not sure if he said hands or hands. It's quite important in this research project where one of the people was called Hans, and it was all about rock climbing. So there's lots of things about hands as well. So being able to differentiate hands from hands was really important. That's what AI should be good at. But instead, it's not giving us that probability. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm an advocate for critical use of it, but not it's the end point.
I think it alludes also to the question about when it is appropriate to use it and when it's not. So there's different stages in the research process when I would and wouldn't use it, but that's not the same for every project I do because every project I do is not the same. So I think that's why it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. But just to go back to your question, there's lots and lots of published papers comparing how AI does an analysis of work that you've done previously. Lots of those, there's one on our, if you go to this QR code, is one of the references by David Morgan, is probably the first article that was published that did exactly that using ChatGPT. What most people are doing is they are taking projects that they've already analysed themselves and then asking the AI to replicate it. I don't think that's a very good comparison because if you've already done it yourself, you know what the findings are. So you're using that knowledge to guide the AI. So a more useful comparison is either to have two separate people do it. So one person do it with the AI and one person do it by humans so that you've got a purer comparison. Because if you guide the AI knowing already what you think the results are, then you're not actually testing whether the AI comes up with the same answers or not because you've already.
I still think there's an inherent sort of problem with that to an extent. Like AI does something different.
Yeah.
So what I often see with qualitative coding and with research projects and research teams that I support is they bring in So this could turn into a rant. So if
No,
I
don't.
start.
We don't have
Yeah.
tea.
I'm quite proud about it, but you get very, very highly skilled people who understand an incredible theoretical amount about in vivo at the sky. And then they do very low stakes coding. Where are people answering this question? When are they talking about this? I surface latent content code. That's when AI is brilliant. Just can you code or just find everywhere where, you know, we interviewed 300 GPs where they're talking about their first placement. Now I want to look at that and actually look at what is the meaning, what was the gut, because that's the interpretation. But actually, we often conflate that first layer of coding for content and latent stuff that's important. Question 1, question 2, question 3, where are they talking about X, Y? That's great. But within that, you then want to go and interpret. But it's making that process explicit that I think is clear, because at the moment, it fudges all of that together. It goes like, oh, they're really happy here. Happy's not the same as they are talking about their placement. Those are two different things, interpretation. And I think it's differentiating those two that's important.
Wonderful. I think that's a really good note to finish on. Shall we thank you, Steve and Christina, for that?